Thank you to the patrons for supporting the channel. The creature had no fur, and its face was smooth. It had a short muzzle and oval ears sticking out from the side of its head. It had the general appearance of an animal's head, though much larger than the animatronic animals from Freddy's. Running down the center of its face was a long, straight split, exposing wires and a line of metal frame. A thick plastic material was stuck to its face in large patches. Its eyes were stark white bulbs, and its chest split open, folding outward like a horrid metal mouth. Welcome back. Today we're covering the second book in the Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes trilogy, The Twisted Ones. There's a lot to cover here, but before we get into that, I just want to plug my second channel really quick, link in the description. There's a bunch more stuff coming there soon. Okay, so the video about the Silver Eyes was super fun to make, and a lot of you seem to really enjoy it, so let's just get right into The Twisted Ones. The Silver Eyes was released in December of 2015 to relatively good reception. Some people thought the pacing was a little slow or the writing was a little amateurish, but generally people liked it. There was a little confusion about the canonicity of the book, but Scott ended up kind of clearing that up. Essentially, the book series and the game lore exist on parallel timelines that aren't necessarily canon to each other, but they share similar characters and concepts. But it would be a while before the second book, The Twisted Ones, would actually release, even a little while after Sister Location. But then, there were murmurs of a new Five Nights at Freddy's book titled The Twisted Ones, including these sets of teasers commissioned by Scott from Lady Fizzy, a community member who was an artist. I've talked about my thoughts on Lady Fizzy, but it ended up being really cool of Scott to support the community in this way. The art was really cool, and it ended up making people really hope that there was going to be a game with these characters eventually. Little did they know there already were. Kinda. We'll get into that later. Along with the excitement, there was a lot of speculation and theories as to what this book would be about. Some thought, much like FNaF 2 to FNaF 1, this was going to be a prequel book, possibly looking back at Fredbear's or something similar. Others thought the Twisted Ones weren't actually the animatronics, but instead referring to the Afton family. If you'll recall, the William Afton name was introduced in the Silver Eyes as the Killer, but after Sister Location of the subsequent Custom Night update, the Afton name became associated with all sorts of other lore. Michael Afton, William's daughter, Afton Robotics, etc. So the idea was that this Twisted family was going to be expanded on in the book. Then I remember the book's Amazon page ended up releasing, which gave a little bit of a plot summary, basically explaining that it would be a direct sequel to the Silver Eyes, and takes place about a year after the first book. Then a preview of the first few pages was released, and it essentially gave a bit more context. Charlie, the main character from the first book, is now in college, learning robotics. Finally, after a long time of waiting, the book was released on June 27th, 2017, not long before Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Now, in my Silver Eyes video, I basically just used this section to talk about the basic plot points of the story, but I want to go a little bit deeper here, talk about my experience while reading, some sequences that I think stood out, and just some of my notes. But before that, we should probably give a brief rundown of what happened in the last book. The main character of the Silver Eyes was Charlie, the daughter of Henry. Henry was the creator of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. When Charlie was a small child, her father ran Fredbear's Family Diner, but it was closed after a child went missing. Who was that child? Her twin brother, Sammy. After that, Charlie was raised by her single father, who started Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. She had a relatively normal childhood until tragedy strikes again at Freddy Fazbear's, and 5 children go missing, including one of her friends. After Freddy shuts down, Henry, for unknown reasons, kills himself, which starts the rumor that he was actually the murderer. Charlie goes to live with her aunt until 10 years later, when her and all of her childhood friends go back to her hometown of Hurricane to pay respects to their lost friend. While they're there, they decide to visit the abandoned pizzeria and are attacked by the animatronics. They're also met with a security guard named Dave, who reveals himself to actually be William Afton, Henry's old business partner and the real killer. At the end, Charlie activates his spring locks, presumably killing him, and they all escape and go their separate ways. The Twisted Ones picks up 1 year later. Here's the blurb on the back. It's been a year since the horrific events at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and Charlie is just trying to move on. Even with the excitement of a new school and a fresh start, she's still haunted by nightmares of a masked murderer and 4 gruesome animatronic puppets. Charlie thinks her ordeal is over, but when a series of bodies is discovered near her school bearing wounds that are disturbingly familiar, she finds herself drawn back into the world of her father's frightening creations. Something twisted is hunting Charlie, and this time, if it finds her, it's not letting her go. Pretty ominous, so let's get started. So yes, it's been a a whole year since the last book. In that time, Charlie got in a fight with her aunt and ended up leaving to go to college near her hometown. She ended up studying robotics, sort of following in her father's footsteps, and is now rooming with one of her old childhood friends, Jessica, from the last book. One of her other friends is visiting as well, John, who's in town to help rebuild some of the destruction caused by a giant storm. John and Charlie try to go on some dates throughout the whole book, but they usually end in disaster. Charlie has also been struggling with terrible nightmares since the events of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. One thing that is immediately obvious about this book is that the writing quality since the last book was hugely improved, and especially in the opening, there's a lot of great foreshadowing. Like this, page 5. Charlie was long accustomed to nightmares, the worst moments of her past forced up like bile into twisted versions of memories already too terrible to recall. She shoved these dreams into the back of her mind in the morning and sealed them away, knowing they would only breach it when night fell again. The entirety of that excerpt is a bunch of parallels between how the twisted animatronics work and other concepts throughout this book that will be revealed later. It's priming you without you actually knowing it's doing that until way later in the book. One thing to note about Charlie's nightmares is that they relate to her lost twin brother. In her dreams, she keeps feeling his presence, but it's like he's trapped somewhere. She also keeps having visions of a door that she thinks he must be behind. That will tie in later. Oh, one other thing has changed about Charlie since the last book. She's been doing sit-ups. They mention that like 4 times in the book. After class, Clay, the chief of police of Hurricane, and also the father of one of Charlie's friends, comes to visit Charlie. He says he needs her to look at a body. He takes her to a field where a man has been mutilated in a very strange way. Symmetrical and very specific patterns have been sliced throughout his whole body. Page 35 to 38. She knew those wounds. She'd seen the scars they left. On each side of the dead man's neck was a deep, curved gash. This is what had killed him. It would have been instantaneous. Or maybe not. Each piercing of the man's flesh seemed like a killing blow. Any one of them might have punctured something vital or simply been deep enough to drain him of blood in minutes. What was left of him was grotesque. This is what happened to Dave. So, a victim of a spring-lock suit, when the only 2 people, Henry and Dave, who should have been able to access the spring-lock suits, are dead, and there's no actual spring-lock suit to be found. Clay does share something interesting with Charlie, though. The police never ended up finding Dave's body after the animatronics dragged him away into the darkness. With newfound uncertainty, Charlie and Jessica go to the abandoned pizzeria to see if they can find his body. And they do. He's a bloated corpse inside a trapdoor, presumably shoved in there by the animatronics. So that rules him out, you'd think. Later, Charlie stumbles upon another body in a field. This is one of the creepiest scenes to me, specifically just for one line. Page 92. There were deep, ugly gouges from the spring locks of an animatronic suit. But before she could examine them closely, Charlie stopped, horrified. She looks just like me. That line, "she looks just like me," is horrifying and implies so much without explicitly saying anything. It's a horrifying thought, the idea that you could stumble upon a mutilated corpse and then realize it might be me they were after. Anyway, Charlie calls it into Clay, and she goes to investigate the victim's house. She doesn't find anything of interest except for 3 grave-like plots dug in the back of the victim's house. These will be important for the very next scene. John and Charlie go to Charlie's childhood home and find a secret room that has been knocked open due to the storm. Inside this room, the same grave-like mounds have been dug. When they dig these plots up, they reveal that there are strange, plasticky and blank, giant animatronics buried there. The Twisted Foxy wakes up and attacks Charlie, trying to capture her inside of a weird mouth stomach, but they're able to break it in time. Afterwards, though, they discover something interesting. A disc inside the animatronic that, when turned on, makes the characters hallucinate that the animatronic looks monstrous, like in the teasers, when in reality, they look more blank and rubbery, and not at all lifelike. It's later explained that this is meant for them to look cuter and more realistic to children who already have a good impression of the animatronics, but the characters in this book, who are scared of them already, see them as monsters. It's based on expectation and past experience when these chips are activated. They also discover one more thing about the disc. The marking on the back, Afton Robotics LLC, on it. William wasn't just Henry's business partner. He was also a creator of animatronics as well, although not the original Freddy in the gang. William seems to be the one who has created these twisted animatronics, and they were unleashed after the storm unsealed them. Later that day, Charlie's worst fears are realized after her, Jessica, and John plot the victims on a map and realize they create a direct line to the college, to Charlie. Using this line, they contact Clay and the four of them stake out where the animatronics may strike next. Unfortunately, they're not able to stop it in time, but they are able to find the victim before she dies, and presumably she recovers in the hospital. This next part is a little bit confusing for me, but I'll be honest, I think after John and Charlie find the hallucination disc, things start to go a little bit downhill for the book. So Charlie decides, because the animatronics seem to be after her, that she's just gonna go out and face them herself. Now, at first you'd think, okay, this is like a sacrifice thing, right? She's just gonna die so nobody else has to. But it doesn't really seem like that's her intention. In fact, it's hard to tell what her intention is. It's almost like she wants the animatronics to bring her somewhere or tell her something, but I don't know why she would get the impression that they would do that and not just kill her like everyone else. And if she did just have some feeling that they were gonna act different, that really wasn't communicated very clearly either. It seems sort of like just they needed to get her separated from the rest of the group. Anyway, she's taken by Twisted Freddy and wakes up inside his chest cavity buried in the ground. The writing here is actually pretty tense, as she's essentially been buried alive, but the coffin is also a saw trap. It's pretty horrifying, and when she escapes, she discovers that she's inside of some sort of underground pizzeria place that isn't Freddy's. It's much bigger and looks pristine, like it's never been opened. While she runs from other twisted and hallucination animatronics, we cut back to what Jessica, John, and Clay have been doing. After Charlie goes missing, they try in vain to find her, but quickly realize that now the animatronics have her, there's no way to actually tell where they might have taken her. In a last-ditch effort, Clay tells the group that he actually has the original animatronics from Freddy Fazbear stored in his basement. He didn't want them to be scrapped, knowing that they had the children's spirits haunting them. So this is another great sequence. John, Jessica, and Clay try to somehow communicate with the animatronics, even though they seem completely lifeless now. I'll just read it because it's so atmospheric and creepy. Page 211 to 213. "I think there's still someone in there," John said slowly. "Maybe so, but this doesn't feel right." Jessica looked down from John toward the suits again. Their heads had moved. They tilted up unnaturally, facing John and Jessica. "Remember me?" John asked awkwardly. "Charlie, you remember her, right? You must. She's been taken by creatures like you, but not like you. They were animatronic suits buried under Charlie's house. We don't think they were built by Henry. We think they were built by William Afton." As soon as John said the name, all the robots began to shake and shudder, convulsing where they sat. It was as if their machinery was being jump-started by a current too powerful for their systems to handle. The mascots were seizing wildly, their arms and legs jerking. Their heads banged against the back wall with painful clanks. I don't know, I just really like that sequence. Essentially, the original gang of animatronics leave the basement and lead John, Clay, and Jessica to where Charlie is being kept, the underground pizzeria. Once together, the group becomes cornered by twisted animatronics, and William Afton steps out. Wait, wasn't he dead? Apparently not. Now here's where things go from unbelievable and crazy to batshit insane in this book. William Afton is now, thanks to some weird haunted, crazy, zombie, animatronic possession power, alive and calls himself Springtrap. On a personal taste note, having Springtrap just be like a guy in an old rotted suit who just like talks and calls himself Springtrap really makes Springtrap go from like creepy to goofy real fast. In FNaF 3, he's this horrifying, silent, rotting creature that just slowly stalks towards you, and you're not really sure who's more in control, the corpse inside or the animatronic itself. But making him just like a dude that's in an animatronic that like just talks to you and runs around is really weird. It's why one of my main criticisms for Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator was giving Scraptrap voice lines. Anyway, he explains that he was just playing dead, I guess, when they discovered him, and now he has super secret mind control, possession, choreography powers over the twisted animatronics. I don't know, it doesn't really make any sense. But things get even more insane when, while they're trying to escape, the original Freddy gang appears and literally Super Smash Bros. Brawls the other animatronics. Literally, it's just the twisted animatronics and the original animatronics getting into an all-out fight. Clay, in this book, literally describes it as a battle royale. This gives the group time to escape, but not before Charlie can beat the shit out of William. She asks him, "Why did you choose Sammy and not me?" And he says, "I did choose you." Oh, what? Anyway, the group escapes as the whole place starts collapsing. But what they realize when they get out is the whole time, the underground pizzeria has been underneath Charlie's childhood home. Okay. But before they can escape, Charlie is drawn back by some sort of feeling and finds a secret door. A door that she believes is the one she's been seeing, the one that Sammy is behind. Eventually, John is about to pull her back and they're going to escape, but then, in a move that made me be in utter shock and awe when I first read it in 2017, Charlie dies. It gives Twisted Freddy just enough time to capture her, put her in a springlock suit. They spend a good amount of time in those last few pages just trying to get her out before the springlocks can go off, but then they do, and Charlie dies. The final scene of the book is all of Charlie's friends at a diner mourning her loss. And then someone who looks exactly like Charlie walks in, and everybody is so excited and goes to meet her, except for John, who ends the book with the line, "That's not Charlie." Okay, wow. Okay, I have a lot of thoughts on this book, but before we talk about my thoughts, let's just talk about what the community at large thought of this book. The reception was a little mixed, but generally good, much like the first book. The quality of the writing was better, the pacing was faster, the tension was higher. A lot of people thought it was a little bit too goofy, but a lot of those sentiments didn't come until later, because we started seeing the sci-fi-ification of Five Nights at Freddy's more in the rearview mirror than we did when it was actually happening. And for a lot of the community, these books weren't actually about a good story, which I think ended up being a flaw for a lot of them, especially after the Twisted Ones in the Fourth Closet. They were more about just finding lore clues. And with this book, there was a lot of stuff to tie in with Sister Location and the now soon-to-be coming out Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Now, the first place I heard about these theories was MatPat, although I'm sure other people came up with these before or in parallel with game theory. But here's some of the things the book tied together with the games. The first thing was the little power module on Funtime Freddy. This tiny little blinking disc is supposed to power all of Funtime Freddy and Sister Location. The widely accepted idea now is that this is actually one of the hallucination discs, and the Funtimes are essentially the game lore's version of the Twisted Ones. But with the introduction of this, what did that make the Funtimes look like when the chip was on? Well, that's where it ties in with FNaF 4. In FNaF 4, the house layout in-game and then in the mini-games is different, but most people chalked it up to gameplay being a nightmare or just generally for the sake of gameplay. However, in Sister Location, an Easter egg showed that not only are the house in the mini-games and the house in-game completely separate buildings, but also that the Sister Location building is underneath the FNaF 4 house, and no one really knew what to make of it. But with the introduction of the hallucination discs, things started to come together. The nightmare animatronics of FNaF 4 aren't actually nightmares. Instead, they're the Funtimes being unleashed with their chips active, making them look like monsters. It would explain why some of the nightmares have teeth stomachs, and the Funtimes store things in their stomachs. But then, why is William Afton putting some kid in a mock-up house to hide from the Funtimes? And why is he watching them from a security office in the Sister Location fake ending? Some thought it was William punishing Michael for causing the bite of 83. Honestly, I'm not sure. Around this time is when I became a lot less invested in solving the lore because it just got too ridiculous for me. One last thing I want to mention is the canceled fan game Project Box. This is probably one of the coolest looking fan games that would have ever come out, and is leagues above the cookie cutter Unreal Engine Free Roam and Game Maker remakes, which, you know, they're fine and fun, but this was leagues above it all. Unfortunately, it ended up being canceled, and all respect to the developer, I understand why they did it, but I was legitimately distraught when I found out that this project had been canceled. Beautiful pixel art style, a lot of really cool plans for gameplay, as well as a focus on story. The game would take place in a slightly altered timeline of events after the Twisted Ones. Seriously, the creator Mediocre Mel has a bunch of posts on the GameJolt page, What Would Have Been, that shows some just amazing potential. RIP Project Box. It legitimately makes me sad to see something that could have been so great scrapped. Okay, finally, let's talk about my thoughts on the book. I'll be honest, I didn't like this book nearly as much as The Silver Eyes, but my thoughts on it are complicated. The first half of this book is great. You can tell the quality has improved a lot, and it really captures you. The setting of the college is not nearly as interesting as the town of Hurricane was, but they end up offsetting it by going to Hurricane a lot or having a lot of creepy scenes and like bodies in fields and stuff like that. I think some of the strongest scenes in this book are when Charlie and Clay are investigating a body in a field. It's creepy, atmospheric, gruesome, and like legitimately feels like a fun thriller mystery novel. And I think a thriller mystery novel honestly is where they probably should have taken this instead of what they ended up doing. There's also a ton of stuff in it that I wish they had expanded on more and we could have seen more of. Like Charlie realizing that maybe she is a suspect because of her connection with Springlocks and her father, or her realizing that maybe her father wasn't the good man she thought he was, or literally any of the stuff with Clay. Clay is like the most interesting character in this whole book. His whole thing with his wife, what his life devolved into, why he has this connection with the animatronics and felt the need to store them. I wish we could have learned more about that too. However, after about halfway through, things start to go a little downhill. It got a little confusing to read at times and just too ridiculous for me to hold my suspension of disbelief anymore. And also, it felt sort of repetitive, Charlie breaking down every 2 seconds. It's like, in the beginning, you're like, oh my god, she's going through some shit. But after like the 5th breakdown in like 20 pages, you're like, okay, here she goes again. She's gonna explain the nightmare again. She's gonna walk out on John's date again. That's another thing. I really don't care about John and Charlie's dates. In the first book, you could definitely tell there was something between them, but it was never really forced or a big part of the plot. It gave Charlie somebody to talk to and connect to and give some exposition, and it ended up being sort of fun and a subtle little side thing going on. But the focus on it is just way too boring in this one, and there's like 3 or 4 too many date scenes in this book. After John and Charlie find the hallucination discs, things start to get way too weird, but you don't really notice it until a little bit later, and then I had just this self-aware moment where I was like, wait, this is where we are from the first book? That's how fast it escalated to just complete insanity. After Charlie decides to go out on her own, it just gets too much for me. Like, they had shown that they could rip the animatronics apart before, and then instead of doing that when they discover them buried, they just let them kill someone else, and then Charlie goes, well, I guess I'm gonna get captured for some reason. I mean, again, it really wasn't clear what her motivations were. If it was just that she got a feeling, she needed to go to them, she wanted to die, that just wasn't very clear. And I seriously, that first point I didn't even write down in the script, but I'm just realizing, literally, why didn't they try and destroy the animatronics? It took John like a pull off of their head and they broke down. They found them. They had a guy with a gun. They had like 4 people and they weren't activated. They could just destroy it. I don't understand. It's unfortunate because after the whole kidnapping Charlie thing happens, she wakes up in the underground pizzeria, it's one of the best sequences of the second half. Just all of the swirling, weird, you can't tell what's reality. She can barely walk because the amount of just weird hallucination stuff that's happening, it's really creepy. I mean, in general, the second half has some of the best sequences, like John trying to communicate in the basement with the animatronic spirits, and them wandering through the woods trying to keep track of them and find where they're trying to lead them, and the really creepy silhouette way out in the field that actually ends up leading them to the pizzeria. But it's also where the animatronics start WWEing each other, and like William is just like a guy who comes out after they literally found his corpse. It feels a little bit like a cop-out when you tease that like he might not have died, and then they find his corpse and they're like, well, this doesn't make any sense, so he's still alive, but he was a corpse. Like, I don't know, it feels not great. And also during this part, a lot of the dialogue just deteriorates to like Marvel quips, like horrifying, insane stuff is happening and they're just like making weird jokes and one-liners, which is weird because throughout the book up until this point, there's been a really good mix of dialogue and a lot of like realistic conversations. I think Dave/William was a much scarier character in the first book because he was believable. He was just this crazy guy with this weird obsession with the animatronics and Henry, and he just like killed people. And that was horrifying because it was something that at the very least felt like it grounded the story. It allowed you to suspend your disbelief a little bit more with the animatronics coming alive and allowed those to be like fun set pieces, while the thing that grounded it was the fact that the villain was like creepy and he could vaguely be a real thing that could happen. Turning him into like a walking corpse that just like talks and runs around and like tries to grab and beat people up with his hands, and he also has mind control powers over big animatronics, is just too goofy for me. And all of that goofy, ridiculous sci-fi stuff ended up laying the ground for the fourth closet, which honestly, the fourth closet goes so far off the deep end that I don't even know if I'll make a video about it. In the beginning of the Twisted Ones, you're captured by the mystery, the intrigue, but as soon as that wonder starts to fade off, all of its flaws start to become a lot more noticeable. All of the crazy, convoluted plot becomes harder to deal with. Sure, maybe there's technically better writing in this one, but the first one just felt more real, visceral, and a lot creepier and more impactful. Charlie's issues seemed a lot more mysterious and interesting and personal, and all of the relationships between Carlton and Jessica, Jessica and Charlie, John and Charlie, like, they seemed really interesting and fun. It just felt more compact, like a really tight story that I feel like honestly could have just ended with one book. Like, honestly, I don't mind that The Silver Eyes was slow-paced. It gives you more time to relate to the characters, and again, it lets you suspend your disbelief a little bit more because you actually care about what's going on, so the animatronics coming to life really aren't the craziest thing. With this book, I just started to realize I don't care about John and Charlie's dates, the door is confusing, and Artie was pointless. By the way, did I mention Artie? He's like this way less funny and interesting and way less developed character who's like the comedic relief, but he's not anywhere close to as good as Carlton, or again, as well developed as Carlton, and he's in like 3 whole scenes in the whole book, including the end scene where they're all like really sad that Charlie died, and he ends up being like really misplaced comic relief. I'll give it this. Killing off the main character at the end of the book was a big move, and they did it in an okay way, I think. It added stakes, it added some emotional elevation to the other characters. But what they did with that in the 4th closet? Look, spoiler alert, I talked about my thoughts on this on my Twitter, but I figure I'll just go over it here to sort of... Again, I don't know if I'll make a video about the 4th closet, so I'll just go over some of my thoughts here. It's revealed in the 4th closet that Charlie was a robot that was created by Henry because William Afton did actually choose her, and that memory of Sammy being taken was actually a false memory. So like the big thing that has been an emotional stake, an emotional like anchor point for Charlie the whole book just wasn't real the whole time. It was like a false memory and she's a robot now. I don't know, it just takes all of the... I don't know what the word is, like down to earth or real impactful stuff that happened in the book that again grounded it in The Silver Eyes, that let you care and be scared of the other stuff because you cared about the characters, because it seemed realistic, so that when all of the supernatural crazy stuff happened, it really wasn't, you cared enough to suspend your disbelief for that. They took that whole thing and made it just as insane as everything else. And so now it's like, what are the books for other than lore, like finding lore for the games? And it's not like it was a bait and switch where it seems like they were just trying to come up with a Shyamalan twist at the end. Like, this book has a lot of stuff that hints to the fact that she was a robot. There was fake blood found at the scene in certain areas, and the fact that she sort of looks the same as she did because I guess there were only so many robot versions of Charlie made at different stages of her life. I don't know, it's clear they knew what they were doing, but I don't think it was a good idea. Charlie's internal struggle and the guilt with losing her brother and trying to figure out who her father was a lot more interesting and impactful when it felt like it had a plausible answer. I guess my real thoughts on the Twisted Ones are wasted potential. There's some fantastic sequences, and if they had taken some of the stuff that happened in this book, and also some of the stuff that happened in the last book, they could have made something really great, but it just fell into the trap that most Five Nights at Freddy's media does, the sci-fi-ification of everything. It goes from being unsettling and uncanny, and that's what makes it scary, to a little over the top, but still pretty scary, to just so insane that it's just hard to take it seriously at all. So like I said, I don't know if I'll make a video on the 4th closet. I might, I'm not ruling it out, but don't expect it anytime soon. But hey, if you are looking for more Five Nights at Freddy's like book content, or you are just as sad as me about Project Box going away, on my Patreon, I'm doing a Patreon exclusive devlog series where I work on finishing that, if anybody remembers, Silver Eyes fan game that I came up with a while ago and Daco played and then I completely abandoned. I'm doing a devlog series on my Patreon, finally finishing it, and there's a lot of cool stuff going on there, so check that out if you want. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Look, despite all my criticisms, the book is still a fun read, and I enjoyed making the video. Up next, as voted on by my patrons, is Doki Doki Literature Club / Doki Doki Literature Club Plus. I'm doing a video about that, a lot about like the fourth wall breaking, how the horror is, and I haven't really looked a lot into Doki Doki Literature Club Plus, but we're going to be talking about that too. Until then, let me know what you thought of this video in the comments and suggest what I should cover next on my Twitter. You should also follow me there because that's where I announce when I'm streaming at twitch.tv/SaganHawks. See you all next time.